Now let's look at the possibility of a Second World War breaking out in 1938. And this was not an unlikely scenario. After the Anschluss of Austria in March 1938, when Austria was occupied and then annexed, there was an ongoing crisis, the so-called Sudeten Crisis. Now, the Sudeten Germans were Germans that lived in the border regions of Czechoslovakia bordering to Austria and Germany. And there were many ethnic Germans there, and Hitler wanted to bring them back into the Reich. There was this ongoing trouble. May was the first crisis, and everything was mainly solved, not particularly well, in the Munich Agreement in late September 1938, which was basically the height of the infamous appeasement policies, which I covered already in another video. Now, 3 questions we're gonna cover here. Was Hitler bluffing, or did he really want war in 1938? Then, what were the Czech army's chances of defending against a German attack? And third, what was the German plans to deal with France and the United Kingdom intervening? Now the question is, did Hitler want war? And the answer is simply yes. He wasn't bluffing. He really wanted to go and basically wipe Czechoslovakia from the map. And he was pushing for this quite eagerly, and this created actually quite some resistance among the generals in the Wehrmacht. This was the first spark of the military resistance against Hitler. Because they looked at the situation, they said, okay, we can beat Czechoslovakia, but France and United Kingdom will declare war on us, and in the long run we will lose this next world war. And so they were like, okay, we were gonna lose everything we built up. We built up now the Wehrmacht, and we were still building it up, and we're gonna lose. And they particularly saw that Germany would be lost in the future completely. So they saw basically, at least some, for instance, Beck, he saw, okay, Germany will be doomed. It will be no great power anymore in Europe. So they saw the grand strategy and said, okay, this is way too dangerous. Now Hitler was originally very optimistic that France and the United Kingdom wouldn't intervene. Yet at the same time he put a lot of efforts into building up the Westwall on the German-French border, which was the fortification line there. And he actually was pretty angry when the progress was too slow, in his opinion. They shifted a lot of manpower over there, and additionally he put a civil engineer, Fritz Todt, into charge because the General Adam wasn't performing up to his standards. So there was quite some eagerness there. There was quite a lot of clashes with various generals and various different opinions. And he also focused very much on every detail of Case Grün, Fall Grün, which was the name for the operation to attack Czechoslovakia. Now the Allies, especially Chamberlain, tried to avoid a war at this point. And Hitler finally changed his mind. The question is why? Because afterwards he really felt cheated. He actually noted he should have gone for war and that he was cheated by the British because now they had time to build up their army. Now, up to the end of September, Hitler was very eager to go for war, even though nearly all of his demands were met, and he put the demands very high. He basically told, okay, we want to have the complete border region, which also meant that the Czechoslovakia would lose all the defenses there. So the country would be now nearly indefensible. Now the question is, why did Hitler back down? And here are several factors we have to take into account. First off, the Allies were showing, okay, we are not giving in now. So the French army was mobilized, they moved some divisions to the front line. Additionally, the Royal Navy was also mobilized. Nearly all his requests were basically met. And then again, there was a lot of pressure both from the generals and also Göring. And finally, there was Mussolini, which most authors put the most emphasis on. Mussolini also said, okay, don't do this. And he initiated another talk which led to the Munich Agreement. And you need to remember at this point, Hitler was very fond of Mussolini before the war. He looked up to him for quite some time. This was basically his role model to a certain degree. This was not the Mussolini of like in late 1943 or something. He was listening to Mussolini in this regard. And so many assume that Mussolini's intervention was the most important one. Now the next question is, what were the chances of Czechoslovakia defending against the attack? Now here we have various accounts because since if you only glance over this topic, you will realize, okay, the German generals started the military resistance because they feared they would lose the war. So at first you could assume, okay, they thought they wouldn't have a chance against Czechoslovakia. No, they were looking at the bigger picture. They were quite certain that a world war break out and then Germany would lose. And in the end, well, it seems they were right in this account. And let's look at the whole strategic situation for Czechoslovakia. So there were mountainous areas there, yet there was one major problem. After the Anschluss of Austria, basically Czechoslovakia stuck out and was surrounded by Germany now. And originally they assumed that Austria would be neutral in any conflict that would be coming up. So basically the Germans were standing in the north, in the west and in the south of Czechoslovakia at this point. Additionally, Poland and Hungary also wanted certain parts of Czechoslovakia. They were quite hesitant, but they wanted loot. So it was a very, very precarious situation for the Czech. Also, basically, since it was a rather small country and the arms centers were rather close to the border regions, they had to defend the border. Of course, they had fortified positions there, but they were still in build-up, and especially in the region to Austria, there was almost nothing to defend there. Another main problem for Czechoslovakia was that it was quite diverse, and if we look at the numbers for the soldiers, they were made up by 52% Czech, 22% ethnic Germans, 15% Slovaks, 5% Hungarians. And they basically considered, okay, the ethnic Germans, we can't give them weapons if we mobilize. This would be too dangerous. And in the end, 128,000 men didn't follow mobilization, and around 35,000 joined the German Freikorps. As you can see, this is not the basis to fight because you have the enemies in your own country. So as you can see, the strategic situation was not particularly well for Czechoslovakia. Now let's look at the force structure, the size of the forces. In 1937 there was about 171,000 men in the army, and they had 17 infantry divisions and 4 fast divisions. Fast divisions are basically motorized divisions and or tank divisions. Now for mobilization they assumed around 34 divisions with 4 fortified divisions, 4 fast divisions, and about 138 auxiliary battalions by police forces and other minor units. Now of course, since the May crisis and the other developments, they started to build up the forces more, mobilize more and be more prepared. Still, in September 1938, the German High Command reported they assumed 17 divisions, infantry divisions, 4 fast divisions, and around 6 to 12 reserve divisions, which some were still in build-up. In contrast, Germany deployed 26 infantry divisions, including Gebirgsjäger, mountain divisions, and 9 fast divisions, so Panzer divisions, leichte Divisionen, and also motorized divisions. On the air, the number were also 2,700 for the Luftwaffe, around 700 for the Czech Air Force. And the quality of the Luftwaffe was particularly better in most accounts here. So, very bad situation again. Strategic situation bad, the number of forces also bad. And note, this was the German numbers deployed there, not in total. Now let's look at the chances. Now you can argue, okay, they have mountainous areas and they have some fortified positions there. Yes, the problem is if there's one breakthrough, they have a major problem. You can get through and surround them. And they were already on a strategic scale surrounded. So just one German breakthrough and the whole front could crumble. Additionally, to sustain a war, they would have to defend certain key areas, which they couldn't because there was not enough terrain to trade for. Then they had a large amount of Germans within their country, which also knew the places around and would help the Wehrmacht likely. And they had far less troops. Now, one of the leading Czech politicians assumed in May 1938 that they could hold out for 14 days. Whereas the Czech general staff assumed actually 3 months. Whereas the Germans in summer 1938 assumed that after 5 days they would have defeated them sufficiently to redeploy important divisions to the Western Front. And the Germans also did Kriegsspiel, a war game in 1938, which assumed the two-front war with France and Czechoslovakia, and after 11 days they assumed they could destroy the Czech army. So basically every calculation besides that of the Czech general staff was very dire, basically 2 weeks at most. Except they assumed 3 months, but the likelihood of that, maybe if they fight a complete guerrilla warfare in the forested areas and in the mountainous areas, then it could be, but this would be not really holding the countries, was just delaying the defeat. So basically the chances were rather bleak. Even if they started a world war, the Czechoslovakia wouldn't be rescued. Similar, basically, this happened with Poland in 1939. And we can assume, well, the Czech army would be defeated. Likelihood of a second world war was also rather high. So the war in 1938 was a very likely chance. Now, the final question is, how were the Germans planning to deal with France and the UK? So as mentioned before, originally Hitler assumed there would be no intervention, but also to make sure he built up the Westwall. And he got into several clashes with his generals because they were not building up fast enough, so he put Fritz Todt in charge as civil engineer. Additionally, he shifted a large amount of workers to the Westwall to put them away from building up infrastructure and housing. So basically the plan assumed that the French wouldn't attack or in limited numbers, and that as fast as possible redeploy the armies after they defeated the Czech. So very likely scenario to what happened in 1939 with Poland as well. Now to summarize, Hitler wanted war, he wasn't bluffing, but then he decided in the last moment to take basically the prize, which was served on a plate, which he hadn't do anything for, especially considering the whole pressure coming from Mussolini, his generals, and even Göring. And afterwards he called Göring and his generals cowards for this. It's quite interesting, and he felt cheated because he assumed now the British will have more time to build up their troops and the French as well, so that he would be in a worse situation in 1939. Quite interestingly enough, if you look at the situation, Germany was actually in 1939 in a far better situation than it was in September 1938. Now why is this the case? Because they integrate fully the Austrian divisions into the German army, additionally also the Sudeten Deutsche and also the Czech arms industry. Quite some tanks in Poland were of Czech production. So, and also a lot of equipment for infantry divisions and something else, something I covered in my expansion video of the German army from 1933 to 1939. Now, although some authors claim that Czechoslovakia could have a great chance against defending against the Wehrmacht in 1938, well, I don't think this is the case. From everything I read, everything points against it. So the numbers, the strategic situation, everything was rather bad for the Czech. What would likely have happened is that France and the United Kingdom would have declared war and the Second World War would have started likely on the 1st October 1938 and not on the 1st September 1939. Big thank you here to my Patreon Andrew for asking this question. Thank you for watching and see you next time.